Welcome everyone to our first NestJS Meetup in Vienna. The Meetup group exists already since 4 years, I believe. And slowly, as you see, slowly but steady, we progress. And today is the first big milestone in the history of the Meetup. It's the first event. And with you, but I barely get a chance with such a big crowd to interact. So I was like, what can we do to get every single drop of energy out? And there is this thunderclap thing. You know how this thunderclap stuff works, no? So you rub your hands really loud. You really have to feel it. Everyone, also you two, boring kids here, yeah? Come on. What about you, Tech Alex? Rub your hands. Ready? What about you? Ready? 1, 2. Ow! Okay, one more time. It has to be at the same moment, okay? It's like 1, 2, clap, okay? All together? 1, 2. Wow! Amazing! Whew. Ah, that hurts. No. Good. Introduction is in text. We have 2 talks. We have one about Ory, a very cool open source authentication implementation. Then we have a very, very short pizza break, around 15-ish minutes. And then we have a second round of our old colleague here that is also very active in other meetups, Michael. And he will tell us a story about decorators and where they are coming from. If you're interested to see the cutted recordings of this live stream here, we will cut it and publish it and send it out over our newsletter. The QR code is here. You can scan it. I will scan that quickly now. Wonderful. Now, we also have sponsors, as always. One of our main sponsors is the Angular Austria Association. Why that? Because we have it. It's non-profit and it is slightly related to NestJS, not a lot, but still very, very nice that we get some support from that part. We also have Linkoders, sponsor of this. Great applause. Sponsor of this amazing place here. If you like, you could have a small pitch, or should I do that for you, or do you want to do that about your company and what you're doing?
Welcome everybody.
So I echo it. Welcome everybody. They do cool projects. They have a very nice office, as you can see, in Vienna. And go check out their website. Go check out what they do. It's beautiful and it is amazing. What else can I say? Other sponsor, next sponsor is Push-Based. We are very happy to kickstart a second meetup in Vienna. I hope that we will put as much time and love into this one as we do for the Angular one. And yeah, we are also already are also active in NestJS Node development. If you have some interesting things to talk about, let's do that. And as it is the first meetup, we are interested, how did you find us? And you can tell this to us verbally today, or you can also fill out our Slido form where you can inform us where you found us, how we can promote the meetup even better, and in general. Only good stuff in that form. I would check it out. Let me scan it right now.
Next slide, you will see the results.
On the next slide, I will see the results. So, or maybe even after the meetup, we can check it out. We also have a raffle. In this massive crowd, we will raffle a couple of different things. A JetBrains license, free for a full year, any product you want. Incredible, unforeseen price so far on meetups. And as a second prize, a free conference ticket for the VIA Developers Congress in Berlin 2024. It's a pretty amazing conference. If you ask a question, you get hand out a number, and then we raffle the ticket for you. And it seems like today you have high chances to win one of those. For our talks, we look for new speakers. If you are willing to give a talk, for example, you two, tell us what you do at work, tell us what you're interested in your private time, share your knowledge, your experience, or just your funny jokes with us. Yeah, scan it. That's the mentality. Scan the QR code, and afterwards we collect your email address, and next week or next month you're here on stage. Another person that will be here on stage is Edouard. I want to quickly introduce the co-founder of that meetup, by the way. Edouard will help us to run that, organize it, make it better, make it more interesting, also fill it with content as today. And I am very happy that I can announce today his talk, Authentication and Authorization Strategies with Nest and Ory. Welcome, Edouard, on stage.
Great. So let me switch the slide. Just a second. All right. And start the timer. Hey. Hi everyone. Thanks for coming for the first NestJS meetup. Really appreciated. Thanks, Michael, for the introduction, for opening yourself as usual. I appreciate that as well. And thanks Encoders for organizing this and hosting us. So, as Mika said today, we will talk about authentication and authorization strategies with NestJS and Ory. So the goal of this session is to introduce you to Ory, because I can imagine it's an underrated toolkit for identity and access control management. So out of curiosity, how many of you know about Ory? Yeah, I gather. Yeah, so did you try it or just heard about it? Okay. I will try to heal that and give you the will to experiment with it. I hope I will reach that point. A few words about me. So I'm Edouard Maleix. I'm French, as you might guess from my accent. I'm a freelance consultant focused on server-side JavaScript. For the past 5 years, I've been working on dozens, maybe even more applications and libraries with NestJS on NX, in an NX monorepository. So I use that experience and share it in articles that I write, in this talk as well. And you can check those articles, by the way, on Pushbase or Dev2, because in fact this talk is coming from an article. So if you want to know more about it, you can have a look at this article, and it will go a bit more in depth than this short talk. The agenda for today, I will start with some few industry insights, just to review quickly the landscape in the web application security. We'll see then in about Ory and how it fits in that context. I will also introduce you quickly about it. I will discuss then what we'll build, so what application we'll build to put Ory into practice in NestJS. We will then dig into how to set up Ory locally so that it can work on our machine. Once the Ory setup is done, we will move on to NestJS integration. So we will see how to integrate Ory API into our backend application. And then we will make it run and see how it works. If we have enough time, we might do a live coding. Otherwise, I prepared some recording, so I might just comment the video. Let's see how it goes. hopefully after this session, you should be ready to try Ory at home. If not, you can still read the article or get in touch with me. So first of all, do you know the difference between authentication and authorization? Yeah, we all get it clear? We're sure about that because sometimes there are ambiguities. And even just yesterday, I was reviewing a PR and it was still not clear for a peer who starts and what's the purpose of each one. So just to clarify, authentication is the act of verifying credential, or verifying the identity of a user or a machine. So to do so, it will check the credential. If the credentials are valid, it will either deny or grant the access to the user. Then follow the authorization. The authorization process is the process of checking the permission of a given authenticated user or machine. So we simply try to answer the machine, simply try to answer the question, has the user permission? If yes, then we grant the access, otherwise we deny. Hopefully it makes things clear. Now let's move on with those insights I mentioned. So according to OWASP Top 10, so maybe a few words about OWASP, because maybe everyone is not aware about OWASP. It's a foundation that promotes web application security. They write documents, exercises, challenges, toolkits, lots of tools to make you aware and to improve the web application security. And in one of those references is the top 10. So it's a list of the most common web applications vulnerabilities. So if you don't know about it, I think you really should have a look like right now. Put yourself a reminder and have a look right now because it might bring awareness to things that you overlooked that happen to the best of us. And in that list, the most common security vulnerability is broken access control. And a broken access control, an example is, for example, when a user can act as an admin or when a given user can access another user resources to view or edit at worst. It can also be manipulating objects. So for example, you just pass another user ID in the payload and then being that's it, you can access to the other user account. That might seem trivial, but I think if we all look in front of our own doorstep, we might be a bit concerned if we are honest. Now, how come this could happen? Why this kind of trivial issues can happen? One of my theory, and also Jonathan Whittaker theory, who's a staff software engineer at Auth0, is that authorization has been for too long an afterthought. So I guess you also went through that. You start a new project, you think of all the great features, of all the things that can bring business values, but then there is no clear plan on how authorization is going to be managed. There is not yet much common standards or common products ready to ship that are available out there. For authentication is done. It's something which is pretty common to not roll your own authentication. It's even a common saying. But for authorization, it's still something that needs a bit of time, and that's where Ory might be useful. I will let you know a bit more. So, what could be the solution to this problem? One, I think, is that we, as backend developer or people who work on full stack, we need some solutions which are simple enough to maintain and manage in-house, efficient because we don't want to trade performance with security, obviously, cost-effective because the budget is rarely increased about security, except if we already are victim of a data breach, and ideally based on open standards, because we don't want to be locked in a vendor solution. We want to be able to have a solution which is which can support changes and for which we can switch without too much cost. Let's see now how Ory fits in that context. So, what is Ory? That's the first question. quick timeline so that you have an idea of the story of Ory. It started in 2014 as a pure open source project with the intent to provide a complete suite of web application security tools. So it covers authentication, authorization, and even OAuth 2 connectors. So in 2019, the founder of the open source project created a company, so in Germany, and built the Ory network product. It's built on top of the Ory open source stack, but it's hosted on the cloud and provide many benefits, including this one in 2023, that the platform is ISO 27000 and SOC 2 certified. So what does it mean? Is that you can use this solution for enterprise product. And that's what led me to delay so much experimenting with Ory, because I had to work with Auth0 in the past just because of that reason, because of those certifications. And I might not be the only one in that situation. And this year, it feels like the company is really about to scaling up with a new fundraising and the appointment of a new CEO who is really deeply rooted into the IAM landscape. So I would suggest to place your bet on Ory. At least that's what I'm doing. So as said, Ory, it's a complete tool suite of web application security tools. And it contained several independent modules. The two one that we'll focus on are Ory Kratos and Ory Keto. Starting with Ory Kratos, the authentication counterpart of Ory, which has the following feature. So first of all, it has a self-service API. Self-service API is what you will use in the front end. So that's what you can use to register your user, log in your user, verify your account email, recover your account access in case you lose it, modify your profile settings, and so on and so forth. What makes it customizable are those identity schema, which allow you to define the properties of your user, the authentication flow that they will support. And you can have multiple schema so that you can have different type of user affected to a given type of schema. Oh, sorry. It supports multi-factor authentication. That should be pretty obvious. So it has all the modern solutions, so TOTP, WebAuthn, even passkeys very recently. It also had admin APIs that you can manage identities on your backend and also do some batch import and do some migration from your existing authentication solution. And a great feature are webhooks so that you can bind some custom logic into Ory authentication flow. So let's say that you want to trigger a custom email after registration. You could trigger a webhook after registration. If you have a beta phase and you want to close sign up for a given period, you could also have a webhook triggered before and just stop the sign up and say that, okay, we are closed at the moment. That's just an example of one of the many things that you can do. Let's see an example of what a flow looks like in Ory Kratos. So let me take my pen. Here on the left, we have Alice, our user. On the right, we have Kratos. So Alice will send a request to Kratos saying, okay, I want to register. Kratos will send back a form, at least some data that can be rendered into a form, and will create a flow that allows to track registration. Then Alice send her credential, fill out the form, and Kratos send back, well, create an identity and send back the identity. So in between, we could also imagine an extra step where Kratos would send a request to our backend over here, and then the backend would reply, intercept the request, and eventually modify the identity or do its thing, and then send back the identity to Alice. So that's an example flow, and all the other flow are a bit similar with this back and forth between user and Ory Kratos. Another flow, which is a very important one, obviously, is between Alice, our user on the front end, our backend, and Ory Kratos. So Alice would send a request along with the cookie that she received after login. The backend would send the cookie to Kratos to retrieve a session. Kratos would, in case of success, reply with the session that contains the identity. So identity being an acronym for a synonym for user or account, if you prefer. Then the backend can process the request, whatever it was requested by the user, and send back the response to the user. In another case, let's say that this cookie is invalid, the session is invalid, or whatever other reason. So we will just receive unauthorized access that we can, as the backend, forward to the user. So that's it for Kratos. Let's quickly discover Ory Keto, the authorization part of Ory. So Ory Keto is based on a very interesting concept. They use what we could call declarative models. So instead of having some explicit statement or some explicit code that will define our authorization rule, like some backend code that will check, okay, this is the user logged in, let me check the owner ID, which is a foreign key of that given table, and check if the user has access. Instead of doing this, you have some separate models which are really responsible to receive all your rules. How you format those rules? You will use the Ory permission language to do it. So the Ory permission language is a subset of TypeScript. So it's not Turing complete. It's really a very simple part of TypeScript where you can define your namespace, your relation, and your permission. And I will show you in an example soon what it looks like. Ory Keto also has the relations API that allows to create, delete, and update the relationships. And the permission API that you will use for your authorization check, so to check if a given user has access to your API. So let's do a bit of Keto grammar so that it becomes a bit more concrete for you. That declarative models I mentioned, because I know it's all abstract. Let me take my pen. So at the top here, let's imagine that these are two rules set. So we say that document owners are a set of user. So document, imagine that as an entity in our database. Same for the user. And that's the thing that we bring, is that document owners are a set of user. Based on that statement, we can say also that document owners can edit. So these are our two rules. Some instance of those rules below is that, okay, I will create the relation user Douglas owns the document JavaScript, the good part. Okay, so let's say user Douglas create the document, so we create that relationship. And later on, if we would need to check the permission, we would more or less ask to Ory Keto, can Douglas edit the document JavaScript, the good part? And that's almost as explicit as that. But let's go on and go a bit more concrete. So an example flow. Let me take back my pen. Once again, Alice, our backend, and now this time this is Ory Keto over here. So the backend will send a request once again for the authentication. We know that part already. In case of success, we receive our identity. And what's new here is that, you create a relationship after you receive the document. So you create that link between the document and Alice. Ory Keto send back a successful response. We are on the happy path right now. And then we can send back the successful response. So at that stage, okay, we have our relationship. Now what can we do with that relationship? There's a second scenario where we want to edit the document. So we have Alice, once again, that authenticates and send a request to edit the document. So our backend will ask to Keto, can Alice edit that document? Okay, case one, yes, Alice can edit the document. We handle the request, modify the document, store it, and whatever, and send the response to Alice. Other case, okay, no, Alice has no link with that document, so the backend should forward the exception. All right, so that's it for the theory about Ory. Thanks for holding until there. We'll soon be more concrete. Let's see now how we'll integrate Ory. What will be our application? So we'll build a cat fostering application, which is a hub that will link cat guardians and potential foster who love cats and who wants to host them in their home. Key features of that app will be user authentication, profile management, user roles and permission, cat profile listing and management, and fostering matchmaking requests. So plenty of holes potentially for authorization. The architecture will be very simple. The self-service UI is a component pre-built by Ory, so that's pretty handy for backend developer like me who are pretty bad front-end developer. So you will have in it everything to log in, to register, to recover the account, and so on and so forth. Ory Kratos, that you now know, will receive the request from the self-service UI for the authentication purposes. It will send the webhooks to our NestJS application, which in turn will also send requests to Ory Kratos for the user verification. And the NestJS app will send requests to Oiketo to create relationships and check permission. And here, the basic will have a Postgres database to store our entities. So our entities will have some user, some cat profiles, some fosterings request. Pretty simple. Moving on to the setup with Docker. So we will use Docker for our local environments, because I think it's the most straightforward way to do it, because Docker provides a very up-to-date and very lightweight images. You could also use it in production at your own risk, but this setup could be ported indeed remotely if you are able to handle the security and the access, or if you use a private network. So starting with our Docker Compose setup. So here we'll have those 4 images: Kratos, the self-service UI that we mentioned, Keto, and Mail Slurper, which is a simple server UI that will receive our email and allow us to mock an SMTP server, make things a bit easier for local development. We expose the ports that we need to access in our NestJS backend. We override default command with our own configuration file. And we create a binding with some local volumes to give access to all the configuration file for Kratos and Keto. So now, speaking of the configuration file of Ory, we have many flavors to configure those files by default. But here I picked a more custom path inspired from Auth0. So I don't know if anyone has experience with Auth0, but they provide an interesting way to reuse your configuration file, which is templating, simply. So you can use some YAML weird notation here. Let me take a pen with the right color for the contrast. Here you see those template placeholder starting with 2 hashes. This is for primitive, so to replace string, boolean, numbers, you would use this notation. And for array replacement, you would use a double-at notation. So your configuration file in the end would look like this with those weird placeholder. And by passing your environment variables, you will have some magic happening and some environment variable substitution that will replace those with real values. And that's what you can then pass to your Docker containers. All right, now that's an heavy one. That's the Kratos configuration, and there are lots of things to configure. One of the great things of Kratos is that it's really very highly customizable. You have really so many options that it's one of the difficult things when you start with it. You can be a bit overwhelmed. So we'll just highlight quickly some of the important options to get started with. So the cookies, obviously, that's what you can get wrong from the get-go. So Kratos use cookie and session-based authentication. And they are pretty strict with security by default, so they really force you to have cookie only available across a single domain. And so you better get that setting right. So the idea is that if you work locally, well, you should just stick with either the loopback IP, so 127 blah, 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 or 0.0.0, or localhost eventually. But you have then to stick with it from your front end to your self-service UI, and obviously Kratos, so that it creates the cookie with the correct domain. The courier, so that's simply to configure your SMTP or HTTP mail sender. The DSN stands for data source name, so that's where that's the URL more or less the data source. By default, it will store only in memory your data, which can be handy for testing. Identity allow you to list the location of all your schema that we mentioned previously. We will zoom in the schema in a minute. Self-service is probably the biggest part of the Kratos configuration. That's where we can specify and configure all the flow. So all the URL, all the webhooks will be defined in that place. An example here for the login flow. Here we configure the after effect. So here, if a user log in with a password, we would trigger this webhook with that given variable method. The authentication would be set this way, so that would be an API key method. So it means that we would have a header with this given name and with this given value set. So that allows us on the backend to intercept and authenticate the request. And then here, everything is the detail of how the payload will be formatted, how it is expected to be handled by your backend. These are the methods that you can configure that are supported by Ory Kratos. There is now also the passkeys. So passkeys were made available after I created this presentation. So I'm a bit outdated here. Serve is simply, well, as you can guess, how to configure the Go server that is behind the scene. And now the identity schema. As you can see, it's really a very simple JSON schema. Here you define the properties that your user is expected to hold. Here we have it very simple, just an email, which is expected to be the identifier for our password credentials. And we expect to do some verification by email and recovery by email as well. Here, an interesting one. So when you send webhooks, Kratos will use a specific file to format the payload. Does anyone recognize this format? Do you know this syntax? That's a quiz where I always win, usually. But I would like to be surprised. Someone said Python? No? No one dares? Hmm? No? Okay, I stopped torturing you. This is JSON.NET. So yeah, that's very strange. It mixes data structure and a bit of logic, as you can see here. So I think it's a thing created by Grafana, but you should look, ask Google or whatever to get the truth of it. So here what it does, it will evaluate the identity passed in the webhook. And if in that identity we have the email starting with test dash, then we just stop the webhook, we cancel it, which can be pretty handy for testing. Other case, so in fact most cases, we will just format our request body with this JSON value. So we will have just a property called identity with the content of the identity. So that's what our backend should expect to receive then. Now, Keto. So I said I would be a bit more concrete with Keto. Now is the moment. So this is the subset of TypeScript I mentioned. So I guess if you look at it, you really can think it is TypeScript. You should be familiar. So everyone familiar with TypeScript should be, I hope, familiar. So the content of those namespace files are a bit comparable to domain-driven design aggregates, where you have all your entities and relationship and basic logic, basic business logic into it. Except that here it's just authorization logic. So for each namespace, you declare the expected relation. So group, imagine that the group could be an admin group. In that group, what we would have some members. So it means that there will be a relationship between user namespace and the group namespace. A bit more interesting and complex, the cat profile. The relationship of a cat profile could be owners, which would be user, or editors, because in our cat fostering app, we want admin to be able to edit our cat profile as well, to edit or delete for moderation purposes, let's say. And with this notation, using the subject set, we will allow some group, to edit our cat profile. For the fostering request, we will have a relationship with the cat profile, obviously, and the foster user, so the participant, those who requested to foster a given cat. And now the permission. So the permission will make use of the relationship to compute if whether or not the user can perform this given action. So as said, for the cat profile, you would be able to edit a cat profile if you are part of the owners or if you are part of the editors. You could foster or request to foster a cat profile if you are not an owner, because obviously you don't want owners to request to foster their own cats. That would not make sense. For the fostering, we want to permit the approval action if you are a cat profile owner. So we would traverse the relationship with the cat profile and access the owner via the cat profile this way. The rejection, we just reuse the same condition as for the approval because it's the same principle, same business logic. For the addition, we just want the participant of the fostering request to edit the request. And for the read access, we want those who have approval right and those who have edit right to read the request. Hopefully, everything is becoming a bit more concrete with Ory. And more importantly with Ory Keto, because I know these parts can be very, very abstract, but we're getting there, Let's now move on to the integration. So that's where we get concrete, that's where we really see Ory in action. So, sorry? Sorry for the interruption. Little technical issue.
But go on.
Okay, I'm going on and hopefully the screen will keep on going as well. So we'll start by configuring our NestJS application. I like to use some classes to do some validation of the environment variables. So here that's just an extract. We will have our endpoint to the Ory, Keto, and Kratos API. We will have the Ory action API key. So that's what Kratos will send to our backend and that we'll use to authenticate the request. And here, these are API key that we would fill out if we would use Ory network. So if we would use the cloud-hosted solution. In the backend, we will handle two types of webhooks. One after registration, one after login. So let's study the case of after registration. So what we want to do is once a user registers on Kratos via the self-service UI, we also want to create our own user on our database so that we can still create some links between that user in our database and our own set of data using some foreign keys. So we don't depend on the identity created on Ory Kratos side. So let's say that we have that user/on sign up endpoint That's where we will receive the webhook request. First of all, we will pass through that Ory action guard that will take care of validating the header that we mentioned previously. We will have a validation pipe that will ensure that the request is formatted correctly so that it contains the identity that we expect. If it does not, we really take care of formatting the error as Ory expects so that we can display that error in the front end as well. And very importantly, we set the correct HTTP status code. If we want to be able to mutate the identity sent by Ory to create a binding between our user and Ory identity, we need Ory to accept that mutation. So we need to set the HTTP status to 200. The Ory action guard is very simple. It implements the canActivate interface from NestJS. In the canActivate function, we will do a comparison between that header that we mentioned that we receive and the API key that comes from the environment variables. Here, very, very simple, very straightforward. The Ory webhook error is following the schema documented by Ory. So an instance pointer, which is optional, and that will allow us to say, I want my error to appear under that given field on the UI, and the messages, so the message that I want to display on my form. This is just an extension of the default HTTP exception form on NestJS. The idea is just to avoid having a specific exception filter in NestJS to handle the error correctly. Otherwise, you will need an exception filter that will format the error in your correct JSON format. Here, this way, it's a simple trick to ensure that the format of the error is how Ory expects it to be, with a status code property and a messages array. In the end, if everything goes well, that's how the error should look like. Let me just switch color of my pen. Let's say that you have an invalid email address. It should be rendered correctly under the given field, and same for the login. Now, as for the implementation of the logic of the user creation, that's also pretty straightforward. We check, first of all, if there is any user. Sorry, wrong color. If there is already an existing user, we don't have any reason to go on with the flow, so we interrupt the flow. We send an error formatted as expected in the Ory format so that we can display the error correctly once again. And then we save our user in our database, and very important step, we create our binding. Here, by assigning and under identity metadata public the ID to our internal user ID and sending it back to the response, we create the link, we create the binding. And it means that when we want to verify our user, we'll be able to reuse those two identifiers, the one from the Ory Kratos identity and the one from our database. So that's what I will show you right now. Let's say that we have these users get current user endpoint, where we just return the currently authenticated user. So we will have an Ory authentication guard. So this is a guard that I created in an open source library, which wrap the API from Ory. So that makes it very straightforward to integrate it into NestJS. We have a cookie resolver and a session token resolver, so that you can say, okay, pick the authentication value from that part of the request. Next step, this guard will send a request to the self-service API to say, okay, does this cookie relate to any existing identity? If yes, we go to the post validation hook. And in case it's positive, we assign the user to our request context. And here we can see that we can retrieve our ID that we bound to the identity. And we also have the identity ID. So this way we are on the safe side. We know who's authenticated into our app, and we can track the status and the user across the rest of the flow, including the authorization. So first of all, how to create relationships. So let's say that this user, this newly created and signed in user, want to create a cat profile. It will call that a given cat profile endpoint with a post request. We will, of course, check that the current user, the user is authenticated correctly with this guard. And the implementation is the following. So I just wanted to appear good. So I wrapped everything in a transaction. I hesitated to make a shortcut, but you definitely have to wrap that logic into a transaction, because if things go wrong at any step, you need to be able to roll back and ensure that all the relationships that you create are deleted. So here we create our link between our newly created cat profile and the admin group, those editors that we saw earlier. And here we create a relationship between our cat profile ID and our user ID, so the owner's relationship. So this way we have some data created on Authentication. Okay, let's see now how we can make use of it. So yeah, if things are wrong, we roll back and delete those relationships. So to check permission, we need a case, and a good case is when we want to update an existing cat profile. So this is the endpoint. We would have two guards, so the Ory authentication guard that we saw earlier, and a new one, the Ory authorization guard. So this is also a part of that set of library that I mentioned, that here will instead interact with Authentication permissions API. And in that decorator, in the Ory permission check, you declare for that given controller method what are the conditions to evaluate. So what my guard should send to Authentication to evaluate. And here we will ask Authentication, is this user an owner or is this user an admin? Now for the evaluation of the permission, we just saw some function earlier. So just to make a link, the is owner permission and is admin permission. Now we will dig into them. So the is admin permission will just take values from the request, so from the execution context to be more accurate from NestJS, retrieve the user ID, and here also the request parameters passed in the path, and construct the relationship. So this is also some API that I created to make it handy to compose a relationship or a permission query. Here you can really verbally state this one. So the subject user with that given ID is in members of group admin. I think I do not imagine that. We can all read that and say it verbally. Same for this one. And that's literally what we send to Authentication to evaluate. All right. Since I'm a bit late on the schedule, I see that I'm at 40-something minutes, I will just show some recording of the interaction with the backend. Hope it's fine for you, instead of just doing it on live coding where things are going to take a bit more time. So what we will do is just to spin up the project, do the login, the registration, of course, before it, and interact with the API and see those authorization check in action. And eventually also see how to automate that with some end-to-end test, because I think that's a very interesting part. So we would configure our Ory containers. I think we'll skip that part, make it faster, with just a little bit of environment variables. Let's skip that. You can have access anyway to the code or that article if you want to know more how to configure it, or ask me. Yep. Let's make it run. Do you see it correctly? Yeah. So here we are on the self-service UI that I mentioned. So that's the pre-built front end from Ory Kratos. Of course, you can reuse and build your own UI component using the self-service API. Nothing forbids you, but if you are lazy or want to get started very fast, that's really, as I said, an ideal step. So here, okay, I will create that user. my email address, good idea to show that publicly. Then we need to verify the account. To do so, we will access that mail slurper UI that I mentioned. Right. Okay, now we are verified. Our backend should accept our login request. So we are going to log in via that UI. Let's try a failed attempt and see how that looks. Okay, we have the error here correctly rendered at the top of our form. Now let's try with a correct credential. Should work. Very good. Now let's dissect a little bit what a session looks like in Ory. So you can see that you have all those properties, including the most interesting one, the session. But also some interesting parts is the authentication methods and authenticators assurance level. Hopefully you see it correctly. The resolution is maybe a bit blurry. Let me highlight it. So over there, you could have two values, AAL1 or AAL2. That allows you to check the level of authentication so that you can do, for instance, some step-up authentication. If you have sensitive operation, you could say that, okay, this session just have AL1. This given operation requires AL2, so requires signing in with a TOTP or with a security key. That's what you could check. Right, so that's our session. You also have account setting view where you can manage the TOTP and security keys and passkeys and so on and so forth. So everything is built in that self-service UI. All right, so we have a bunch, well, we have a single user. So ideally we want several users, including an admin and a nobody, just to be the witness and check out authorization is working. So this is the CLI that we would use to make things, but we will skip that to make it faster. So we'll skip that. Now let's go test our API. So we have a user, an admin, and a nobody. Now we want to create a cat profile with our first user. So important. First, let's call it Alice to identify her later more easily. Okay, so Alice create a cat profile. Okay, very good. We can see the owner ID. Let me take my pen again. We have our owner ID here. Okay, so that's IDs, Alice IDs. Now let's take that cat profile ID and use it for an update request. So now we take the session token from another user, which is the admin, and the admin should be able to edit. Very good, so the admin was able to edit. Now we take the session token from the third user, the nobody, who should not be able to edit. So we take that token, we pass it in our variable, and we'll send a request with that token. And here it is. The request is forbidden. So Ghetto did its job. Here we have a bit more complex example with the fostering requests, but for the sake of time, I will just skip it. You will have to trust me that it works, but the idea here is simple, is that when you create a fostering request, only the owner of the cat profile should edit, should be able to approve or reject the request, and only the participant should be able to edit. Now instead, let's have a look at how we can automate that, because I think it's more interesting. So we'll see how that with Jest, and use the Jest hooks to set up our test, and also tear down the setup so that everything runs as before when the test suite is done. So we have our setup hook. Here we trigger the function that will generate our configuration files with a specific environment file, as you can see here. Here we have a specific data.ci file, which contains some different value than those used in local development. So we do that for Kratos and Keto. Then we restart our container so that they consume those configuration files. And we initialize a clean database connection to isolate our entities for the test environment. All right, for the setup. Now for the teardown, we will close the connection, clean up everything. We will revert our changes, so regenerate the configuration as it was before and restart our Docker containers. Now for the tests, we'll see that it's pretty simple. As soon as you have those factories ready, so a factory to create an admin user, a factory to create that admin relationship, and another factory to create another user that will be just a regular simple user. Here, let's make the assumption that we have our backend running for those tests, obviously. You could just run your check, run your request as you would do locally, but with the comfort of the automation. So that's what we would do here. We would check our API cat profile creation. So we would check for the authentication over there. Should work. Update the case where the user is owner should work. The case where the user is admin should also work, obviously. But the case where the user is a nobody, it should not work. And we can extend that logic to the fostering request very easily. I could show you a run of the test, but I guess you can just believe me that it works. Otherwise, you can just access the repo and run it by yourself. Now to conclude, so here we saw the story of Ory in a greenfield project. So a pretty complex journey, but still way less complex than when you have to convert an existing project to one using Ory. So of course it comes with some challenges related to migration of your user and permission and challenges on how to manage your environments. So when I mean environments, I mean local environment, test environment, CI, production staging, so on and so forth. So as long for the user migration, as long as you have access to your user data, and even better, to the password hashes, Ory supports many hashes from bcrypt. Well, I'm going to lie if I said I have the list right now, but I think they support 5 or 6 different algorithms that if you know where the salt and the value of the salt is placed, it can just take those hashes and put the password in their own database, and that's a zero effort migration for your user. You don't have to log them out, they don't even know about it. Worst case, you need to reset your user password and, well, ask them to log in once more and create a new password. Then you would use the identity API for that purpose to just do some batch request and send all your existing user to Kratos. Really very pretty straightforward. It's a bit more complicated for authorization. Here, from my experience, I would suggest that you go step by step. So you identify one permission, you dedicate your effort into it, you ensure that it's correctly end-to-end tested and even eventually manually tested. And you map that existing permission to an Ory Keto permission. You eventually adapt and run your end-to-end test once more and deploy and repeat until you get it right for all your permission. Of course, if you have the time and the resources, you can go all at once, but I would not advise doing this. To manage multiple environments, I think what's one of the great strengths of Ory is that since it's totally open source, you can stick with it for your local development, for your test environment, and for your CI environment, because that's super easy to set up. I hope I convinced you. And I would really highly suggest to move to Ory Network for staging and production, because they have a very fair price. Even to get started, you can even get started for free. And you can replicate your configuration using the template very easily to your staging and production environment. Really, that's 1 hour to not even 1 day effort. Then it's up to you to decide if you want to benefit from all the certification at a given cost, or if you want to do the effort of the maintenance of some new services and add a burden of some operative work in your company. And then I would also suggest to use some vaults, such as .n for HashiCorp, so that you can share all your environment variables between all the stages. And then it makes the management of environment variables a breeze, at least from my experience. If you access the slide, you can have a link to those resources, so articles, the source code that is used and demonstrated in this presentation, links to the GitHub repository. And that's it for this long presentation. Thanks for holding that long. I've been condensing a lot, so thanks for holding until now. I wanted really to capture everything. So that's the amount of time intake. And I would like just very quickly to say also thank you to my wife, because she, I think, did a great work with this slide. I did not have the time to dedicate it to her before, so I do it this time. Also, Michael, because he helped me with my first slide. Yeah.
The applause is for his own wife. Mm-hmm. And his second wife, hopefully soon. Awkward silence. No. Let's do the questions and handing out the numbers. There is 1, 2, and then I guess 3 here. Shoot.
Excuse me, can you?
What is the, let's repeat it loud so that it's also on the recording. What is the difference between OAuth and Ory?
Yeah. OAuth? OAuth is just a standard.
Auth0.
Auth0. Well, they are a bit competitors, but I tried to not mention that competition before. But definitely Auth0 is not open source, so one of the most difficult things with Auth0, from my experience, was the local development and, even worse, the end-to-end testing. Because when you need to have a specific tenant for either for each developer or a tenant which is shared for all your developers, that's a nightmare to set and maintain. Right? That's a pain in the you-know-where. So that's one really big pain in the fox. That's one big difference, that you cannot self-host Auth0. The price is a very, very big difference. I don't know if you know the price of the license of Auth0. If you don't know, then have a look. You will see the big difference here when you want to go for an enterprise solution with all the security methods supported by default by Ory. You will see really the huge difference. And also in terms of monthly active user, the difference is also pretty huge in terms of pricing. So I think it's two different angles to the same problem. And also they try to catch up Auth0, in fact using the same standard, because Ory is based on the Google Zendibar paper. And now, by the way, Auth0 is also trying to catch up and provide an authorization solution on that same paper. So that's also that difference, is that Auth0 for the moment is more an authentication solution and not a full IAM solution yet.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. First one, I'm talking about the local identity software. So I think you always have to right? You can't combine it in one. Am I correct?
Let's repeat the question.
Because like if I'm thinking of my resource server, I cannot access resource server and identity server in one application. Can I?
I'm not sure I get the question. Maybe an example for the.
Let's say it has to be a separate server, a separate application Ory, which my resource servers and check this if the, let's say, token or the cookie or the session is valid. It cannot be packed into one application.
No, you have indeed your here NestJS application, which is the management of the resource. So the thing that exposes your own business HTTP API or whatever API you have. And indeed, Ory, Kratos, and Keto are separated servers.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I cannot like all the minutes the same.
I mean, if you code in Golang, you could try to take the code from Ory, Keto, and Kratos and merge everything together. I would.
So the question is, can I self-host Ory products?
Yes, not only. I know that I can. And I was thinking, I mean, for example, in some other programming language, I can try to grab a library and then pack it all in one application. So on the same application that provides the resources, we'll also check the JWT documents and see, okay, the JWT token is fine. Okay, I myself check the database, this exists, the user exists. I myself keep the resource available. Save the resources. I know that microservices in the 21st century by now, like thing of the past, but still we can do that. That's not my question. Or it has to be a separate service.
It should be. I mean, if you code in Go, as said, you can take the code from Ory, Kratos, and Ory, Keto and integrate it into your own. That might be a bit of a difficult effort, but that's theoretically possible.
And my second question, I saw in your configuration, you mentioned in the cookies, you have to specify the domain explicitly. So I cannot share my Ory, I mean my Kratos actually, with several applications or clients. They're running on a separate domain.
If it's separate domains, no. I mean, there are some tricks. If that's subdomains with the same domain, that would work. Yeah, but separate domain would not work, except if you use some trick. For example, they developed a proxy CLI that allow you to proxy the request from a given domain to another. So there are some tricks to do it, but using plain Ory Kratos, that's not possible indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You also had one, I believe? No? Okay.
What bothers me for the authorization process,
right, the performance. Let's say you want to change everything, right? Because that's what the OWASP says. So even can this user read this entry, and you have a list of 20 cats, say, and you want to check all of them, and if every one of them sends a network request one by one, is there a data loader?
You would have to check
something?
the internals of that Ory Keto, and the logic is in fact behind that Google's ND bar. So I don't know the internals of how that relation tuple is transformed into an actual request against database. I would lie if I would say so. But they definitely claim and argue that performance was the first, one of the first criteria when building that system. So I would hardly be able to repeat what I read in the Ory Keto documentation, but I'm pretty confident that it would be faster than doing your own lookups in your own database.
That's good claim.
Because in the end, that's always the same story. Even if you ask Ory Keto to do the lookups, you do just a single lookup. Instead of you in your database potentially doing multiple lookups, multiple requests to the database. So in the end, I think it's pretty fair to say that this approach is more performant. Single request to check the permission, and pretty complex permission check that can be combined in a single request. And I think that's one of the important aspects as well.
Okay, thanks.
More questions?
Great.
Great. How great on a scale from 1 to 2?
What's the best?
2.
2.
Yeah. Then I would say Q&A is done.
Great.
Thanks and applause again for some wonderful talks. Thank you very much. And we are
Okay, so finally we are doing the second part. Yeah? Finally we are doing the second part of the meetup. Yeah? It took us our time. There were too many pizzas, I guess. That was the thing. So the second speaker today will be Michael Bromley, talking about decorators in NestJS. So he's going to explain the magic and tell us more about the decorators. Michael, your turn.
Thank you. This is just going to work now. Watch this. There. Wow. Okay. Oh. I need to join, right? I need to join. Ask to join. Let me in. I'm in. Okay. Is it just the three of us? Okay. It's cozy.
Sharing the screen?
Oh, yeah, share the screen, of course. That's the whole point, isn't it? I thought I was just bumping up the numbers there. Right, entire screen. Okay, this one. There's only one. All right. I think we're all ready now. So let's go. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for staying around after that incredibly short 15-minute break. You've all had pizza now. Normally that makes people tired, you know, when you go to a conference and they eat pizza at lunch and then you've got to wait them up. But hopefully we've not got that problem today. I'm going to talk to you about the hidden magic of decorators. What's that? I just got to hide that guy, right? Oh, it's on this screen as well. I'm mirroring. Good, thank you. The details matter. The hidden magic of decorators. I'll do the intro thing first. My name is Michael Bromley. I only have one t-shirt, as you can see. I mean, I can, if you're not even sure that it's me, then just check it out. I'm building a open source e-commerce platform called Venture. It's built on top of NestJS. I've been building it for 6 years, so I've been using NestJS for 6 years. Yeah, long time. I'm on X, I'm on LinkedIn. If for some reason you want to know about the things I post on there, you can follow it. That's enough of that. Decorators. If you're using NestJS, you're using decorators a lot. And yeah, it's an interesting topic because it's one of those things where, like, I think a lot of people don't really exactly know what's going on with decorators. I know I didn't. You just see them in the docs. You write the little @ sign, you do the decorator, it works, and then that's all you really care about it. But I got kind of interested in it because in the course of building my own framework on top of Nest, I ended up making my own decorators. And they're very useful. So I thought it's something that probably a lot of people could make use of that if they understand it better. So hopefully I can enlighten you a little bit on this. So I want to go into the background a little bit first. Who has done Angular before? Or maybe still? Okay, good. Right. So another decorator-heavy framework. So back in 2014, I went to the NG Europe conference. Was anyone else there? It was in Paris. Okay, so I took this photo. This is Mishko. And he was, this was at the transition point between Angular JS and Angular 2. And there was all sorts of innovative ideas going around at the time, right? What's Angular 2 going to look like? Is it going to be written in Dart? Is it going to be written in @script? Anyone heard of @script before? Okay, these are the hardcore, right? If you heard about @script, so history lesson. At this conference, Mishko basically announced Angular 2 is going to be written in this language called @script. And Most people have never heard of this language because apart from at this conference, it wasn't really talked about very much. But AtScript, it's kind of hard to see from this slide, but he's made this diagram, and in the middle is ES5. And then encompassing that as a superset of ES5, you've got ES6, which has classes and modules, because this is back in the day when classes was new, right? ES6 modules was a new thing. And then encompassing ES6 as a superset is TypeScript, which adds, of course, types. And encompassing all of that was this language, AtScript, which adding to all of those things, it adds annotations and introspection. And they did this, they actually built this language, right, in Google. And this was like the state of the art of what Angular 2 would look like. But this is like way before like even alpha, I guess. This was just a preview. But you can already see it kind of looks familiar. You've got this directive, and it's got the @ sign. It's a decorator, right? They called it annotations at the time. Because of this @ symbol, this is where the name AtScript came from. And otherwise, it basically looks like TypeScript. So they were going to actually do this like brand new language, and Angular 2 would be in this just totally new language that's just used for Angular, which is a pretty crazy idea. It never happened because in 2015, the TypeScript team announced that these annotation features from AtScript would actually be incorporated into the TypeScript language. And the Angular 2 would not be written in AtScript, not written in Dart, because that was another plan. It would be written in TypeScript, and that's where the whole thing started, right? And I'm glad they went that way. It's been for the benefit of us all, I think. So this decorator's idea that was implemented at that time by the TypeScript team is what we call experimental decorators, because there was no standard about it. There was no like TC39 proposal. It was just like, I guess, Mishko's idea, and probably other people contributed to it as well. And this is what we use now. This is what we use in Angular. This is what we use in Nest. Experimental decorators. They're also known sometimes as legacy decorators. Usually you see that in the context of Babel, because Babel also implemented support for decorators, and it's almost exactly the same as TypeScript experimental decorators. They're also sometimes referred to as stage 2 decorators. Are you familiar with the stage process of TC39, how they standardize the new features, right? So it goes through stage 1, stage 2. By the time it gets to stage 3, you're like, okay, it's going to happen. These ones got to stage 2. They're not going to happen. They're not going to happen in the ECMAScript standard. There is a new standard for decorators, which is now at stage 3. So this one is extremely likely going to be in the ECMAScript standard. They're not supported by any JavaScript runtimes currently. Here's the screenshot from the Can I Use website, where it's like, it's all red, you just can't use them. But they are implemented in TypeScript version 5. So if you write a decorator in TypeScript 5 and you switch off the experimental decorator flag, it will still compile, and it's going to compile to these kind of decorators, stage 3 decorators, and they're incompatible with the ones that we all use. Not massively incompatible, but sufficient enough that you would probably have to like rewrite all the decorators. I'm not going to talk about these ones because we don't use them in Nest. It's just background, right? I think I've read somewhere in the Nest issues, like people saying, when are we gonna move over to these decorators? And I think I've seen Camille say, yeah, like at some point when they can do all the things that the TypeScript decorators can do, because the spec doesn't cover all the things that the TypeScript decorators can do. But so that's the background, a little bit of history. There's more to it. You can go deeper, but that's like, at least from my point of view, that's the journey it's taken as far as I've seen. Why decorators? Like, why do we even have decorators? Why did we need them? Why does the language need them? What even are decorators? What does it mean to decorate something? If you go back to my original opening slide, it's kind of a joke, right? So, at least in English, a decorator is someone who decorates. Usually they paint the room and they put the furniture up, right? So this is a decorator, a magical decorator. But what does it mean to decorate? So here's the typical example of this, and this is a software pattern, right? It's in the design patterns book that some of you might have read. It talks about all these kind of different object-oriented patterns, but to decorate something is like to add capabilities to some existing function or class without changing the structure of it. So a kind of a typical example is something like this log function. So right here, the greet function, we've got a very simple function. It takes a name and it says hello name. That's all it does. Up here we have a decorator function, which is called log, and that receives a function. And it just logs the fact that this function is about to be called, and then it calls the function, collects the result, and then it logs the fact that that function was called and that it's got a result, and then it returns it. When we wrap the greet function in this log decorator, it doesn't change the behavior of the log. The log still logs the name, right? But additional capabilities are added to it. So it's wrapped it and it's added extra stuff to it. I can show you an example of that. So, is this the right one? No, that's not the right one. Let's go to 0, 1. So, ooh, is that the right one? No, that's not the right one. I want 0, 0. Yeah. Computers. So this is literally the same code that I just showed you in the slide. What was that shortcut for getting my terminal up? Alt Shift, Alt F12. Ha, nice. Okay, let's run it. That was fast. It's doing a lot of work, you know. So you can see that this is logged by the decorator function, and this is logged by the decorator function. So it's working. So we can already decorate functions without any special syntax. Like, why do we even need this special @ thing? Can anyone take a guess? Why do we need a decorator syntax when we can already decorate things by just wrapping a function around it?
So that we are writing. So that we are writing this all the time.
Yeah, but once I've defined this log function, I just need to wrap any function I want to decorate. I just need to wrap it. At the point where I declare the function, I can just immediately wrap it.
But it looks shit.
It looks shit. Okay, valid. Valid. Yeah. Yeah.
We've created a new thing within.
Yeah, that's right. So it's not exactly declarative, right? So there's one step between defining the function and then decorating it. There's a step, right? So that's a great point. There's an even more fundamental point than all of these things, though, right? You can't do this to a class method. You just can't. Impossible. So a class, a method on a class. I'll show you. I've got an example. So 1. So yeah, I mean, yeah. Let's take a look at this. Why is this not closing? Oh, there we go. So here we've got the exact same log function. No change. Here we've got a class, person. They can do a greet. Okay. I've given the game away here because I didn't change my code, but so we can decorate greet, but again, it's not declarative because we have a step where we define the class, we've got a step where we have to then instantiate the class, and then we've got a third step where we can finally decorate this function, person.greet. And then let's run it. Now we're on, oops, example 1. So let's run it. And we got like a huge error. We've got a huge error. It says cannot read properties of undefined this.name. So this is coming into problems of this in JavaScript. Yeah, I could use an arrow function, exactly. Or I could do it like in the style of old-fashioned React, for example, and like bind it like this to the person instance, and then I believe it will work. Let's see. Yeah, so then it works. So there's a number of issues with it. So this is a fundamental thing that the whole decorators solution addresses. Number one, you can actually apply it in a way that doesn't require multiple steps. It's done declaratively at the point where the actual class is defined. And number two, you don't have to deal with these weird problems that come about with the scoping of the this object. Okay, decorators in NestJS. So yeah, like you write Nest code, you're writing decorators all over the place. You know, on top of your class, you're writing decorators in front of your methods, you're writing decorators in front of your parameters. Those are the three places you can do it, in front of properties as well. What are they doing? How do they work? It's kind of magical, you know? It doesn't, in the docs, it doesn't really go into what's happening. It just says, you just do this. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of implement like a controller and a get decorator and just have a look at how it could work behind the scenes. So let's take a look. Oh, wait a minute. No, I've skipped too far ahead. Forget the whole bit. Let's go back to the logging. I should have shown you this before. So this is an example of doing the logging, the greeting on the class method, but this time with a decorator. So we have the same thing, but now, yeah, exactly like your point, we can now declare this log behavior directly at the point where we declare the class method. And the decorator looks like this. So I don't know if not everyone has written a decorator from scratch, because it's just not something that you have to do that often. It's kind of like using proxies or something like this. It's just like, you normally don't have to do them. Library authors do, but in application code, it's not that common. So the decorator function will take the target, which will be the class, the key, which is like the method name or the property name, and then the descriptor, which is like, you know, the descriptor of an object where it's got the getter, the setter, the enumerable, these different properties of an object. And then you can do stuff with that, and then we're just basically, the logic's exactly the same. It's just much more ergonomic to use. And just for the completeness sake, I will run that also. This is number 2. And it worked. Good. So now I can go to the NestJS bit. Now that we've established that that's how basically decorators work, that's the problem that they're solving. So this should be, yeah, this is number 3. So here's my application code. And it should look kind of familiar because it's, you know, I've tried to make it look kind of like Nest code. We've got a controller, which is defining the like kind of base path. And then we've got some get methods, and one of which defines a further path with a parameter in it. And then we've got a bootstrap function. So before we look at what's like going on in the code there, let's just run it and see what happens. So it just says it's registering root cats is handled by cats controller.findAll, registering root cats/ID handled by cats controller find1. So it's obviously, it's kind of somehow hooked itself up to this controller. If a request would come in, it would kind of know which class to use and which method to route that incoming request to. So, I mean, there's nothing else to the implementation in this example than just doing a console log. But hopefully you can kind of use your imagination to see how actually you could implement a little framework with that that's going to handle the request.
So let's take a look at what those decorators are actually doing. So this was the app code. The library code is just up here, so it's not too much. Okay, let's just go through this. So first of all, we've got this constant object. It's a map called metadata. It's a map, the keys of which will be a function, actually a class, the controller class. And this map can then store against that class, it can store information about its path and information about any routes which it exposes, okay? So let's take a look at the controller decorator. It's just basically, 4 lines, 5 lines. It takes the path, which is /cats in this case, and it actually returns a decorator function. This pattern you see it used a lot, especially in Nest and other frameworks, libraries that use decorators. It's a decorator factory. So it's a function which will return a decorator. It allows you to configure it, just like the factory function in general, if you're familiar with that other design pattern. So this is the actual decorator is here, and this gets returned. It takes the class, which will be, in that case, cat's controller, and then it gets the this object from the map right here, and it just sets the path. That's all it does. And if we look then at the get decorator, this is a bit more complex, but not too much. So again, it's a decorator factory, so we can configure it with the path, or if we don't provide a path, it will just be empty string, as in the case of the find all method. And then here's the decorator function. It looks up into this map, looks for the controller, which is always passed in as the target. If it doesn't find the controller, we'll just create a new object with empty routes right now. And then we push the current routes, the current path, and the descriptor.value, that's actually pointing at the method that we've just decorated. That's what that means. And we just set that data into this map and return the descriptor, which is basically like no operation. It just doesn't change anything about the behavior. And then the bootstrap function takes that metadata object, which we've been slowly adding things to, and we'll now just loop over it. Each class which is stored in there, we've only got one in our case, but if you have lots of controllers decorated with this controller decorator, you will have a number of classes which will be looped over. Inside that class, we have whatever routes have been defined, and we just log it out. But we have, as you can see, we have the actual direct reference to the method. So we can call that method if we want to. At the moment, we're just logging the name. But you can kind of get the idea of how it actually gets used. And that's it. That's how Nest works. Simple. Yeah, thank you. Obviously, there's a bit more to it than that. But fundamentally, when you're using decorators in Nest, this is all that they're doing. I'll prove it to you. I have the Nest repo right here. I just pulled from the master branch last night, so it's pretty up to date. If we look at, they've got a lot of different decorators we can look at in Nest. So, I don't know, root params decorator. They've got some abstractions and stuff, but you can kind of see that if you, I don't know, where's the get decorator? Get. Oh, maybe it's not in that file. Let me see if I can find it. Get. Let's turn it on case sensitivity, and that, here we go. Here we go. Here it is. So get decorator is, well, it's abstracted out into this create mapping decorator, which returns request mapping. Oh man, enterprisey. Look what it's doing. It's just setting metadata on an object. This is all it does. Now, they do it a bit more fancy because they use this method of defining metadata, which is this reflect.define metadata. Has anyone ever seen this reflect metadata thing before? It's also, yeah, a few have seen it. It's kind of it's a low-level thing, and most of the time you don't have to deal with it. It's usually used by libraries. Conceptually, it's not really doing anything different than what I showed you with this map. It's like, you can give it a class or other objects, and you can define keys and values on it. And that's all it does. It does it in a kind of a nicer way, but conceptually it's the same. And if you would look at any, I think pretty much any Nest decorator, and you kind of drill down through the layers of abstraction, and you get to like, what is this decorator actually doing? And you will find, and we can probably see some more examples, it's literally, they're just setting some metadata on that class or on that method, which then, when it comes to bootstrap your app, they're able to look up that metadata and say, oh, what method should we use? What should we call now? Or, you know, what part of the request object should we return now? Because the metadata kind of points to the property name that we need to return when we do the like app body decorator or whatever. It's just setting metadata. So the conclusion is it's all about one thing, and that is metadata. My skills in making presentations are improving. This is higher than my usual standard, I've got to tell you. All right, but wait, what the hell is this reflect metadata anyway? So actually it comes from this package, reflect metadata. Oh God, where's my browser gone? That's not the browser. Yeah. This is a polyfill, which it polyfills a standard which will never exist. A bit like the experimental decorators, it's kind of one of those things that didn't really make it to stage 3. And it just exists because of TypeScript, basically. It's maintained by this guy, R. Buxton. He actually works at Microsoft. And you know, it's developed and maintained in coordination with the TypeScript team. So it's not like just some random guy, R. Buxton. Why is all of this modern infrastructure depending on this one guy? No, he works at Microsoft. It's okay. Yeah, and it doesn't really do much, this library, but it exposes this reflect metadata, define metadata, and get metadata. It's like, if you look at a map, you've got a get and you've got a set. It's like doing the same thing. And it even says in the README, like, oh yeah, you could implement it in this way, and you don't even need a new library, but as someone said before, it looks shit, so we don't do that and we make a library for it. That's reflect metadata. Go away, Windows. You're right, this is called encapsulation, yeah. This is the fundamental principle of our craft. You hide the shit. That's right. Okay, so you basically know everything you need to know about decorators now, I think. I mean, that's not strictly true. You can do other things in decorators. Like I showed you an example with logging. You can write a decorator which will like time how long a function takes and then send the data off to some like metrics service or whatever. You can basically do anything around that function that you're wrapping. So the scope of decorators as a feature is much bigger than what I'm presenting. But in terms of like the NestJS Meetup, is setting metadata. That's all it's doing. All right, so I told you, I have this open source e-commerce platform, and we're based on Nest, and we make a lot of use of decorators. We have our own custom decorators, and that's how I went on this journey of like having to figure out what decorators really are doing. So an example of how we use it, getting back to the topic of authorization. That's right, authorization, permissions. So we have our own, of course, we rolled our own like auth system. We're pluggable, so you could plug it into Ory, maybe that's the thing that we could explore. But we have a permission system and we have a decorator, so we use GraphQL. So if you've used the Nest GraphQL integration, you've got like resolver decorator, you've got a decorator for query resolvers, like what you see here. So, and additionally, in a vendor application, you can specify who is allowed to access that query or mutation. And we have this allow decorator. And I can show you the code to that. You probably won't be surprised what you're going to see by now. So allow decorator. So it's very simple. It does one thing: set metadata. That's all it does. This set metadata actually is a utility exposed by NestJS. So if I click through to that, you'll see this is like inside Nest, and it says it's a decorator that assigns metadata to the class or function. So useful, you can use these, you know, Nest kind of exposes its infrastructure for creating decorators. So once we've assigned this metadata to that particular resolver, then how do we use that? So if I go over to our auth guard, we have a little line here where we looking at what are the permissions required for this particular resolver function, and we say get that key, like get the metadata associated with that key that we set in the decorator. And this is actually an interesting thing, is that also part of this infrastructure that Nest provides is this reflector service, which is like their native way of fetching those metadata values that have been decorated earlier at the kind of build time or authoring time. So that's like a little bit of a peek into how you can actually use those. Once you've set the metadata, of course, you need to be able to read it, and you would use the reflector. Okay, we do a little bit more complex stuff than that with decorators. So we have a plugin system because we target kind of more complex e-commerce applications. Usually you've got lots of custom logic and modules that you want to support. You might want to add support for like reviews or a wish list system or a customer loyalty scheme or whatever. And we encourage people to encapsulate it into a plugin. And we provide this decorator to do that. And it's actually built on top of the NestJS module system. No, don't want to do that. And I'll just show you a little peek of this. I'm not going to explain it all, but you can just see kind of what can be done. So let's see if I can find that file. I guess it's here. Okay, yeah. So this is the decorator. You can see, again, it's a decorator factory. So we're passing in all that metadata, all that config stuff. And then we do kind of set some metadata, but then an interesting thing you can do is right at the bottom, you'll see the last thing that we do in this decorator is we actually wrap the NestJS module decorator, because you can actually, decorators are just functions. You can just call them. You don't have to use them with this @ sign. If you just call the function, you pass the right thing, it just works the same as it would, as if it was, on your class with an @ sign. So this is a nice way of composing decorators. You can have one decorator that like wraps another, does some custom stuff before. It's almost like decorating a decorator, right? Maybe it's getting a bit meta now, but you can do stuff like that if you need to. I should put that caveat. If you really need to. Otherwise, don't do stuff like that. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you for that amazing talk. I have the pancake flip over here for some questions. I'm sure there are many. It's the same for the exchange.
Is there a way to decorate to a decorator that will log who called?
Log who called?
Who was called?
That's a good question. Is there a way? How would you do that in JavaScript without a decorator? Yeah, I know how you would do it. You throw an error, you catch the error, and you look at the stack trace. I think that's the way you do it. I don't know of any other way to do it. It's probably not very good for performance, but yeah, but then it's going to just yeah. I don't know. That's the only way I know of. There might be another way.
Is there a function? You can write a decorator for the function, and the decorator follows the class.
Yeah, you can do it all within the decorator. It would be like transparent. You won't know that that's happening. Just don't look inside the code, you know? That's the lesson.
I want to ask you, is decorator is the right thing? For example, in Angular, you use it actually to register services or components with dependency injection.
Yeah.
So it actually doesn't decorate things. That's from a design path perspective.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's why they were, when the Mishko presented AtScript, he used the word annotation, which I think is a more accurate term. I mean, the thing is, you know, in NestJS and in Angular, they are like annotating, they're providing metadata, they're not changing behavior, but you can change behavior with them. So, yeah, naming things, right, it's hard.
Who's next? It's from the row.
So, you are making a heavy use of graphic, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
It's, no. The schema first, SDL, yeah.
well, it's just this. It's you have the query decorator where you tell what the object type the query is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have types to same method. But you figured out a way to make sure that they are instances.
So let me get this straight. So you've got are you talking about the resolver? The query, so you've got the query decorator on the resolver function. And then which type, or what type scripting are you then talking about?
You say in your query decorator, you say, this resolver returns product.
Ah,
The return time of the resolver itself, you say it's user, and there's no built-in way.
there's no built-in. So I use GraphQL code gen to generate types for the resolver. You know, there's no automatic way. You've still got to make sure you put the correct return type on the resolver function. But assuming you do that, then you get the benefit that, you know, if the schema changes, then it will change the return type automatically. But yeah, I don't know of any even more magical way than using CodeGen. Yeah.
More questions? Hi,
Hey.
first of all, thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
Very great. I saw that in one of the examples when you created a mock decorator, you use a target in type as any. It was demo purpose, or we can somehow infer the type?
I believe so. Good question. The reason is for my demo, I want to try and simplify things. So there's a few things that I left kind of sloppy just for the demo. But
Because from what I remember, why Edouard team is going away from decorators, it's with problems with type safety. And I thought if it is somehow like this.
it could be. There is, like, I was reading through this document a lot in the last couple of days, preparing for this talk, and I believe there is a bit about typing the decorators. Yeah, if you look at something like this one, you're using some generics and you're using, you know, it's not any.
Yes.
Okay.
Beautiful around.
Oh. Oh, the args. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I believe the axe came to
It's okay. I think that's okay. It's okay. I think it's okay. I don't know. But, you know, if
you don't know what the target where is decorating the best. So
yeah, I think that's because the thing that is being decorated is not directly passed into the parentheses. I think there's some limitations on the way that TypeScript can then infer things. There is some degree of type safety, like it will tell you when there's not enough arguments, for example, going in. But you know, if the Angular team couldn't pull it off, I believe that there's probably something that you can't do.
Taking into account that Nest is highly inspired by Edouard in terms of syntax.
Yeah.
Since they move away from decorators to functions, do you know maybe there are plans in NestJS or?
I don't know. I mean,
But in NestJS, it looks it's
I don't know. I can't imagine it happening in Nest anytime soon. Because if you think about what they had to do in Angular to support that, there was a lot of years of work went into all the underlying infrastructure and design that eventually allowed them to say, oh, now you can use like the inject or whatever. But actually behind the scenes, as you probably know, it was not a smooth, easy journey. I don't think it would be worthwhile for Nest to pursue that. I don't know what the benefit would be.
In Angular is really anything that most complex, so that decorators don't really execute the logic as normal. Let's say TypeScript decorators to do, but Angular really checks what decorator we have, removes the storage, and it's just a compiler information compiler. But Angular is actually in that case.
Yeah, it's got the compiles now. Yeah.
If you use the NestJS Swagger decorators to document your API and use that TypeScript plugin, they will have real-time scan and introspect those decorator to generate your open API strings. That's great.
Yeah, there was one topic that I left off here, which was like, who uses type ORM? Anyone? Okay, so type ORM. So like, I always wondered, like, when you have a column and you say : string, like, how the hell does type ORM know to create a string column in your database? Like, it's like that's TypeScript. That's not even there at runtime. Like, how does it know that? And this is this thing with you see with the experimental decorators, there's also this option emits decorator metadata. And I guess this is what Angular's been using in the compiler, but it's also what type ORM uses, because then they can get at runtime, they can kind of introspect the types of things from TypeScript code, but only when it's been decorated.
Maybe something to your question, as you can see here, there are different types of decorators, and each of them have different signature. So if you tend to build a generic decorator with no expected return type, then your function signature is going to be pretty random. So we end up with targeting, and if you start to scope the expected decorator to one of class method, test of property, whatever, then you can start to scope your type inputs.
Good point. Yeah.
More questions? No? You're sure? Round of applause. Let's get straight over to the Raffles and then to the after meetup.